Battered boats with no engines or living crew. Frozen land people see as their only way out. And a place so horrific it has been erased from every single map out there. These true horror stories all take place in the one country that continues to be shrouded in much secrecy, North Korea. So, let's dive in. It was an early, cold morning in December 2017, and off Japan's western coast, a group of local fishermen were checking their crab traps. This was usually a pretty routine thing to do for them, and so they were just going through the motions, when one of them noticed something drifting out in the fog. At first, he thought it must have been just a piece of debris, maybe a chunk of wood or a buoy that was just floating by the boat, but then the current turned that thing around just enough for him to see air. At first, the fisherman thought he was looking at a person, maybe someone who had fallen overboard. So he grabbed his radio and called in the Coast Guard, and then he just waited. But when the rescue boats arrived and the fog lifted, everyone on board realized that this wasn't a rescue. It was a recovery. Over the next few hours, the Japanese Coast Guard crews managed to tow the vessel ashore. It would turn out to be the small wooden boat that had hand-painted numbers along the bow and weathered worn Korean letters on the side of it. The boat had no lights, no flag, and no visible engine, but it was really what was inside of that little boat that would make headlines across the whole world. Because in there were 8 decomposing bodies. Now, the local media immediately began calling it the ghost ship. But here's what made it really disturbing. That boat was not the only one. No, in fact, between 2011 and 2020, more than 1,000 North Korean vessels washed up on Japanese northern shores. A lot of them were empty, some had skeleton remains, but almost all of them were left unmarked. At first, the authorities thought that they were maybe old fishing boats, caught in storms or pushed off their course by rough winter winds that blow across the Sea of Japan. But that would all change in 2017. Back then, another one of these boats was found. But when the investigators boarded this specific boat, they realized that they just found something that didn't fit the usual explanation. The boat in question came ashore near the Noto Peninsula, which for about 100 kilometers extend into the Sea of Japan. When the Coast Guard arrived on the scene, they immediately noticed this horrible, thick stench coming out of it. And it was really a mix of raw, salt water and gasoline. And the boat, which was actually more of a hull, was scorched in several places, like someone just tried burning it. But this was nothing in comparison to what was actually waiting them inside. There, they found 5 remains of men in heavy coats and mismatched gloves. Their faces were badly weathered, and because of the cold, they were almost mummified. But then, in this tiny cabin at the back of the boat, there was something else that made this whole discovery even more eerie. A small hat-crank radio, still set to this Japanese frequency. And next to it was a notebook wrapped in plastic. When they opened this notebook up, they discovered that most of the writing was in Korean. But it wasn't like a proper diary where, someone would write long sentences about their daily life. No, instead, it was just full of all these numbers that looked like they could have been coordinates. But these weren't really meaning anything to the guard who was reading this, so he began flipping the pages over, to see if there was anything else that he could find. But then he froze and just stared at the last page of this diary, because he finally found more than just numbers. Scribbled in very shaky handwriting were these words: "The wind will not stop. We see lights. Do not turn." Now, officially, the Coast Guard said that these men were likely fishermen who died after drifting off their course. But several investigators privately admitted that something about that boat didn't line up. For one thing, the boat didn't really have any proper fishing gear on it, so there were no nets, there were no long lines, and no storage for their catch. It did, however, have a large internal fuel tank and a reinforced bow, so it was more like a transport vessel than a fishing skiff. And then there was the condition of the bodies. Forensic tests suggested that they didn't actually die all at the same time. 2 had likely been dead for months, while the others only about a few weeks. So whatever happened out there, it really hadn't been quick. When the word of that leaked, Japanese newspapers started calling it the Doomsday Boat. North Korean officials, of course, denied everything, saying that these were just fishermen lost in a storm. But satellite analysts pointed out something else. Around the same time, Pyongyang, which is the capital city of North Korea, had ordered thousands of these wooden boats to fish farther offshore, much further than their usual safe range. And that was because of this aggressive campaign to meet seafood quotas. But the thing was, most of these boats didn't really have any GPS or proper engines, and so it is no wonder that many of them never really came back. But why would the capital order for something like this to happen? Well, there's actually a pretty simple and sad explanation. In case you didn't know, North Korea relies only on itself to provide food for its people. Basically, after the Soviet collapse in the West, North Korea got completely cut off from everyone and became this secluded and heavily guarded country that nobody really sees inside. And as a result of this, they really don't have any foreign trade going in or out. Well, maybe apart from some Tiger whiskey that they seem to be importing from China. So instead, the North Koreans have to rely solely on their own farming and fishing to provide them with food. Their mainland is basically covered in farmland, which, by the way, the fertilizer they use, well, it's their own human waste they collect from their own homes. And as for fishing, well, that's going exactly like their farming. They use whatever they have to go out there and fish that way. The sad part is that there's all these quotas to be met, no matter what, which really means that nobody really cares how they people meet it as long as it's done. But on top of this, these people aren't giving proper tools, like better fishing boats. So a lot of them can't really do their job without being in risk. But that is North Korea for you, corners are being cut right, left and center because safety is never really a priority. And so it really sounds like this is exactly what happened to these ghost vessels. But even knowing all of this, one question remains. Why did this boat drift almost 500 miles south? And how had some of the crew survived so long after the others? Well, the investigators tried reconstructing the likely timeline of this. They believed that the men left the North Korean coast sometime in late summer, probably from the non-Hamgyong province. They might have been desperate fishermen ordered out to sea, but there's also one other possibility. They could have been defectors trying to escape the regime. But either way, they were likely hit by a storm on the way, and that's what made them lose their engine power. And at that point, they would have been adrift. And so freezing and starving, they slowly began dying one by one. But this narrative didn't really explain their notes, because when the actual translators analyzed the notebook, well, they realized that the handwriting in the final entries belonged to two different people. The first had a neat, careful script, which could have been the captain, but the second one, who wrote the "We see lights," was larger, uneven, and almost panicked. And when this was revealed, all sorts of theories exploded. Some said that these lights were Japanese coastal towns, so much like a glimpse of safety just before their end. But the others believed that the lights were something entirely else, maybe ships that ignored them, or it could have been something that they just imagined in their delirium. Because you got to remember that they would have been dehydrated, they didn't really have any food, so anything like that was possible. But there's one more thing about this boat when it got washed ashore. Its engine, it was literally gone, like ripped out. And this really made no sense because it felt very targeted. If it was some storm, hitting the boat, it would have been battered all over the place. But instead, you just had this huge gaping hole where the engine used to be, and then all of these scorch marks around it. So, how did it happen? But it would turn out that this ship was actually just the beginning, because after finding it, reports of similar vessels just spiked. And so the locals began calling them the North Korea's ghost fleet. And each time one appeared, it was practically identical to the one with the ripped out engine. They too were missing its engine, there were no nets, they all had this strange faded Korean writing on the side of the boats. And as for the human remains, well, some of them did have bones scattered all over the cabin, but sometimes there was just nothing at all. But here's what's still happening now. In some coastal villages of Japan, people still say that on a calm night, when the fog rolls in from the sea, you can see this dim orange glow drifting offshore, like a lantern slowly swaying. Now the fishermen say that if you follow it, you'll hear this strange radio signal, like a faint crackle, as if someone's trying to speak to you before it cuts to static. And if you listen closely, some swear that you can still make out 3 words. We see lights. So what do you think? Were those boats filled with desperate fishermen trying to meet their food quota? Were those defectors who, like so many others, never made it to safety? Or is this something darker that nobody really has any explanation for? After all, every winter more of these empty, battered boats arrive, and so it seems like whatever is happening out there is not going to stop anytime soon. By the way, if you like these kind of stories and you haven't done so already, then come and join the community by subscribing, because we dive into stories like this one every single week. In the winter of 2013, along the frozen banks of the Yalu River, which is this natural border between China and North Korea, a fisherman found something wedged between the ice. At first, he thought it was just a piece of fabric, but when he pulled it free, he realized that it was this child's backpack. So he decided to look inside of it, and he found a few clothes, a broken flip phone, and this small family photograph. And on the back of that photo, written in pencil, were 3 words: "We made it." But the family in the photo, they were never found. Now, for decades, thousands of North Koreans have risked everything to cross that river, chasing freedom or maybe just some food in China. Most do go at night when the guards can't really see the line of ice that marks the border. Now, some make it, but unfortunately many don't. And the price for not making it, well, it is far beyond the worst you can imagine. If people are caught, well, they got 2 options. They're either shot right there on the spot, or they get transported into these harsh prison camps of North Korea, where they began this grueling forced labor in totally inhumane conditions. Now, on top of this, they are beaten and assaulted in all sorts of horrific ways. And if that does not kill them, well, the cold and hunger does. But if you thought that was bad, well, it actually doesn't just happen to the people who tried escaping. This also happened to the rest of the family back in North Korea. So their kids, parents, grandparents, they all have to pay the ultimate price. So making the decision of trying to escape is an incredibly difficult one, because they face the ultimate punishment either way. In late November 2013, a local broker told aid workers about a family of 4. So a father, a mother, and their 2 children, aged 8 and 10. The father was said to be this factory electrician in Hyasan, and the mother was a teacher. But they had sold everything to buy their passage across that border. And the plan was very simple, cross the frozen Yalu River, hide in this abandoned farmhouse, and then meet a contact who would drive them deeper into China. So on paper, it looked very easy. But the family's final call tells a very different story. At 2 a.m. on December 1st, 2013, temperatures dropped below 0, making the ice sturdy enough to cross it. And that's exactly when the family began their escape. There was this defector guiding them on their journey as well, and he would later tell the investigators that everything went according to the plan, at least until they reached the halfway point. Because that's exactly when they started hearing dogs. The family completely froze. They couldn't move because they feared that if they did, the soldiers would spot them and send the dogs on them, or they would start shooting straight away. And so for 10 long minutes, they just stayed like that. And it wasn't until the barking completely stopped that they felt like they could continue yet again. So they pushed on the entire night, not really stopping anywhere else. And by dawn, they had reached the far side of the river, so they made it. They were completely soaked and shivering, but they were alive. Their guide left them at a small abandoned house about 500 meters away from the river, just like it was agreed, because this was supposed to be their shelter until the broker arrived. At around noon that day, the mother borrowed the guide's phone and made a call to a contact in Seoul, South Korea. And this was yet another volunteer, who was helping defectors at the time. But their call only lasted about 47 seconds. The mother only managed to say, "We made it, we're waiting," before the line went completely dead. When no one heard from them again, aid workers assumed that they must have been caught. Unfortunately, this actually happens quite often, especially on the Chinese border, because their patrols send captured defectors straight across back to North Korea, even though that they know what sort of punishment awaits them in there. Unlike South Korea, China does not give North Koreans any sort of asylum. But because of how difficult it is to actually cross the 2.5 miles demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, since it's filled with mines and is heavily guarded with incentivized high-ranking officers, The defectors usually opt for China instead because crossing that frozen river, well, it seems like a better option for them. There also have been many accounts of people successfully bribing the North Korean guards up there too, so even though that the other side is still very hostile towards them, even if they do manage to cross, well, it's still seen as a more viable option to choose. But when the investigators checked with local police about that missing family, well, there was no record of any arrests from that night. And so, for weeks, volunteers searched the border towns. They were checking abandoned houses, they were checking hospitals, even detention centers. But the family was just nowhere to be found. Then, 3 weeks later, that fisherman found the kid's backpack, and inside of it, alongside the family photo and the phone, there were these 3 drawings, a crayon sketches of mountains, a house, and a bright yellow sun. And on the other side of one of those sketches was a handwriting that simply said, "Someday we will see the sky." Now after this, the Chinese authorities actually managed to trace the phone serial number. It had connected to one tower on the day of the call, but then it just shut off forever. They also managed to find the SIM card that had been registered to a broker known to work at the Yalu crossing, and his name was Mr. Lee. But here's a very suspicious twist. Mr. Lee had vanished the same week. Now his car was found abandoned on a rural road about 30 kilometers away, with keys still inside. But the trunk was empty, and there were just a few footprints leading away into the forest. Now from that point on, everyone involved in this case, police, journalists, even NGO workers, they just hit the wall. They had no leads, there were no arrests, and there were no bodies. But that's when a strange rumor began to spread. Other brokers working the area started warning clients about the place called the Silent Bend. It was this narrow curve in the Yalu River about a mile upstream from where the backpack was found. And supposedly, that is exactly where something very strange started to happen. And a family who tried to cross near that bend, well, they just began disappearing. A year later, another defector claimed that he had seen this missing family, and he said that he recognized them from the photo shown by the 8 workers. But according to him, he saw them standing near the old farmhouse exactly where they were supposed to be before that broker was supposed to collect them. But when he returned there the next day with help, well, the house was just empty. The only thing left behind was this half-burned blanket and fresh footprints in the snow leading away towards the river. Then, in 2016, so 3 years after the family vanished, a North Korean defector who made it down to South Korea gave this interview to a Seoul newspaper. He said that while he was detained near Hyesan, a guard had shown him a photograph of a family of 4 and asked, do you know these people? But the defector didn't. However, he swore that it was the same exact family from the missing person flyers, the same 2 children and the same parents. But when he was asked what the guard had said to him next, he just quietly replied. He said that they never crossed. To this day, no one really knows what happened to the family from Hyesan. Their names were never publicly released, so it is only really the photograph that is still kept in the file by a Defector 8 group in Dandong. But scarily enough, there are some locals who say that when the river freezes, you can sometimes hear faint knocking under the ice, like someone is tapping from below. Now, in my opinion, the family must have been caught and they either got deported into the prisoner camps or their life ended right there on the spot. The soldiers would then have likely kept this arrest quiet because this is North Korea we're all talking about here. When do they ever provide truthful information when they're asked for it? But you let me know your theory on this one. In the mountains of North Korea, there is a place that doesn't appear on most maps. But it isn't some secret city or town. Instead, it's this valleys filled with fog and fences that stretch for miles, with no roads in or out. Locals call it Yodok, the government calls it Kwan-li-so number 15, but to the few who escaped it, it's simply called hell. Camp 15, Yodok, was established sometimes in these 1970s. Officially, it doesn't really exist, but satellite photos and survivors' testimonies prove otherwise. It sits tucked deep south in Hamgyong province, and to put it simply, it is a valley surrounded by tall ridges with barbed wire, guard towers, and minefields sealing every exit. But the barbed wires aren't the most wild thing about this place. Inside, prisoners are divided into zones. One for re-education and another for total control. And once you enter that second zone, well, you don't really leave. But in case you thought that this surely must be some sort of a high security place, for the most dangerous of criminals, you'd be very wrong. Most of these prisoners aren't criminals in the usual senses. Instead, many are there because of something their relatives did or said. It could have been a joke. They could have sang the wrong song. They tried phoning something out of the country. Or they simply tried fleeing it. And any of these mistakes could condemn an entire family for generations. In 1998, one of those families was a man named Shin and his mother. And their story would become one of the most terrifying first-hand accounts to ever come out of North Korea. Shin was actually born inside of Camp 15, so he never saw the outside world, and he actually didn't even know anything about it. To him, the fences were the edge of the universe that was known to him, and every morning before dawn, prisoners marched to the fields. They worked until the night, no matter the rain, snow or wind, and they were always under the watch of the guards. But the only break in the silence was the sound of footsteps, and the occasional echo of something entirely else. Shin once said that sometimes at night he would hear these distant voices, whispering beyond the fences. At first he thought that maybe it was the villagers that were living past the fences. But when he asked an older prisoner about all of this, well, the man told him very quietly, those are not villagers. These are the ones who never left. At first, Shin didn't really understand, but later, he would. One evening, while returning from the fields, Shin noticed a light flickering near the old warehouse. And this was very strange because there was no electricity in there. So the next morning, guards found small footprints, like child's, leading towards the same warehouse. Well, when they checked everyone, no one was missing. So fearing people somehow started to escape the place, that night the guards doubled patrols. But just 1 week later, one of them just disappeared. His post was found empty, but the gates still locked. Now at this point, many prisoners started to whisper that he too had seen the light and that he decided to follow it. And for some reason, he just never came back. Now for days later, no one went near that part of the camp whatsoever. The guards couldn't really explain what was happening there, but at the same time, they couldn't afford to be losing prisoners or guards like that, because ultimately they would get punished for this. And even years later, survivors said that they still remember that glow, a pale, wavering light seen only in the fog. By 2005, Shin was in his 20s and he had spent his entire life behind the fences, never really imagining that there was anything else beyond them. But then one day he met a new prisoner, an older man named Park. And it was Park that began telling Shin all these crazy sounding stories about the outside world. There was electricity, there were cars, there was roasted meat, all these things Shin just couldn't really picture. And so hearing about all these possibilities, waiting for him just outside of these walls, Shin made the biggest decision of his life. He knew that he needed to escape this place and that he would take Park with him. So one snowy morning, the pair made a move. They quietly slipped through the work detail near the perimeter and crawled towards the fence. And as they did, Shin said that he suddenly felt the ground vibrating as if a distant thunder was getting closer to them. So he glanced back, and through the mist, he saw these faint lights moving along the fence line. And it was the exact same lights all the prisoners and guards were whispering about. So slightly panicked, thinking that the lights were out to get them, Shin nudged Park, to hurry up, and so the two men sped towards the fence that was only a few meters away from them. But then something very unexpected happened. Park got to the fence first, and excited about, getting out of the place completely unnoticed, he touched the wire and fell instantly. What the man didn't know was that the fence was electrified. Now Shin saw all of this happen, but you gotta remember that he didn't really understand what was happening in front of his eyes. But seeing that Park was completely out, she knew that something bad must have happened to him just by touching the fence. So he hesitated for a bit because he didn't really want to leave his friend behind. But the alternative was worse. So, not really seeing what else he could do, he used Park's body to ground the current, and then he managed to climb over the fence. And then he ran until his legs gave out. When Shin finally reached China, he turned back just once more. and he saw this glimpse of the mountain glowing faintly in the distance. Shin would eventually tell this story to the journalists and human rights investigators. He described all the hunger, the punishment, and all the casual brutality of daily life at that camp. But when they asked about the lights the prisoners and the guards feared, he went all quiet. And after a while, he did manage to get out that there were times when the fog came down and the lights appeared near the fences. The guards said that it was nothing, but sometimes people went missing afterwards. When pressed if he thought that this was maybe supernatural, Shin just shook his head and said no, but in that place, even hope feels like a ghost. For those wondering, Camp 15 still exists, though its size and purpose may have changed over time. Some say that parts of it were closed entirely, but the others say that it is still actually active. But to this day, satellite images show the same ridges, fences and warehouses. And every so often, when the mist settles over those mountains, locals in the nearby villages claim that they can still see the faint lights glowing through the trees. Maybe it's just a reflection. Or maybe, after so many years, the ghosts of Yodok are still trying to find their way out. Until next time.